This video is brought to you by Babbel, the #1 language learning app in the world with more than 10 million subscriptions worldwide. It is rare to truly know why a painting was created, and even if there was a reason, it is often lost throughout history. It is even more rare when a painting arrives with that reason painted directly on the canvas.
Alacio il pio de saba pro maximilio impe cathrafractor.
Ouch. Not so good with the foreign languages there, are you, Julian?
Yeah, I don't speak Italian.
Clearly.
Jerk.
It's not Italian, it's Latin, and if you spoke some foreign languages, you might know that, buddy. But don't worry, buddy. Babbel has your back. University studies have shown that 15 hours of Babbel is equivalent to a semester of college Spanish. So head over to Babbel and start filling out their questionnaire, which allows them to gather a little information about you and what language you want to learn and why. And then, unlike other apps that use machine learning algorithms and AI technology, Babbel's lessons are built by 150 real language teachers. And you can download those lessons so you can practice even when you don't have Wi-Fi. And Babbel's lessons will show you what to expect. They'll also help you set goals to keep you on track and excited. And now, with Babbel Live, you can add live classes to your existing subscription for an additional fee, or just subscribe to them as a standalone product. Or not, if you prefer to learn alone. Then you can use the app to practice wherever you are. And with Babbel, it's not just online classes and apps. There are tons of ways to learn a new language, like games, podcasts, and more. So click the link in the description box to get up to 65% off and start learning a new language today.
Alors, qu'est-ce que tu attends?
Hello, can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. How are you?
Excellent, I'm doing great, McGregor. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Well, thanks for joining me on camera here to talk about your painting. I have cracked open the case, I've taken a look at the painting. I have some initial thoughts and observations, and before we get to that, I'd love to hear the history of this painting, how you came across it, and how it ended up in the state that it is.
One of my favorite things to do in my free time is to just browse every single online marketplace I can possibly find. It's really entertaining for me. And occasionally, sometimes you'll find something really spectacular. And this was one of those times. It started with a bronze bust that I saw listed. And I contacted the guy because I automatically recognized this was something special. It wasn't a reproduction. It wasn't something that had been mass produced. It was by an artist that worked directly for the Queen. So I automatically knew that I need to contact this guy immediately. I sent him a message and we arranged a time to meet the next day. And he brought the bust and everything checked out on it. I was kind of surprised everything checked out, but it did. And after that, we were talking and he explained to me that his parents had been antiques dealers. And after they passed away, he had inherited all of their collection. So he let me know that if I was interested, I'd come out to his storage units and see what he had available. And so I agreed. I got pretty excited. I wasn't showing it, but I was excited. And so the next day, we drove like an hour and a half away and we pulled up at this storage unit. It's out in the middle of nowhere. We were kind of sketched out. It was freezing cold outside, middle of winter. And there were icicles melting and all of this art and interesting furniture and historical items. It was all spread out outside, getting water on it. And it was just a mess. It was kind of a lot to take in. It was not at all the scene you'd want to see these paintings in. We pull out this painting from the very dark corner, and here's the painting that you now have with you. And it's pretty amazing. You know, it's quite clearly old, but I didn't know whether or not to believe that it was actually from 1450 when I saw that date, you know, because you just don't find a canvas work of art from 1450 in a storage unit in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. We kept looking. He pulled it out for us to see it in the sunlight, and he leaned it up against a table. And while we were talking about it, he just explained some history, and he said that his parents always told him it was an old master's piece, but he said that it was a Flemish piece, which I was immediately kind of skeptical of. It doesn't look Flemish to me, but this painting was out of my reach completely. There was no way I could possibly afford it, but there were a few other paintings that I knew I could afford, and I knew they were worth it, so I went for those. And then at the very end, it was a perfectly calm day other than the melting snow and the freezing temperatures, but a gust of wind came up, and it swept that painting up, and it crashed it down against a smaller table, and it was one of the most gut-wrenching moments of my existence. Like, it was truly painful. I cannot explain the level of pain hearing that canvas rip and knowing the history that it had. Like, I just decided that it has to be restored. There's no other way. Like, I will not let this painting get thrown away or lost, or it has to be restored. There's just no other way. Several days later, I contacted him again, and he had decided that he did want to sell it, and for a much more reasonable price, thankfully for me. And now that's kind of where we're at. We'd really like to see this piece restored to its former glory and not have that history been, it'd just be tragic to have it be lost. So that's why we contacted you.
Well, to say that the damage is significant is kind of an understatement. It is a pretty complex tear that goes right through his face, which is unfortunate. We'd love to have the tear somewhere other than the face, but it is what it is. So let me tell you what I found about the painting. This painting was glue-lined to another piece of canvas, and on the back of that lining there were several patches, which indicates that this painting has been damaged at least twice before and has been through several rounds of conservation. It's clearly suffering from an accumulation of surface grime and old varnish. And under that varnish layer, which is incredibly thick, it is almost like syrup that was poured on the surface of the painting. We have a beautiful palette of colors, something other than brown, which is really what the painting consists of today. It has been through many rounds of conservation, and all of that history is on the painting. But all things considered, I think that this painting is going to respond well to conservation. It's incredibly dirty. There are some structural issues that need to be addressed, but can be addressed successfully. And once everything is said and done, I think we're going to have a very different painting than the one that I received. McGregor, I have to ask, you appear to be a fairly young man and probably an outlier in terms of most of my clientele. So if I could, how old are you and how did you get involved in the fine art business?
I'm 19 years old, and I didn't really get into the fine arts business. The fine arts business kind of found me, you know? It was definitely unexpected. So I've always loved history, and I've always been extremely drawn to it. Ever since I was little, I would go to art museums with my parents, and I never thought that I would actually be able to own a piece like this. But now that I do, it's extremely exciting, and it's actually gotten me so interested in fine arts that I've decided to change my major to art history. So that's what I'm pursuing now. And it's just a very interesting and very exciting field that I really look forward to pursuing as my life goes on.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, McGregor. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for trusting me with your painting. It's going to be a fun project. I suspect it's going to make me work a little bit harder for it than I think right now, but I'm up for the challenge, and I can't wait to see what I find and give back to you a painting that really deserves to be up on the wall and out of a storage shed.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have you working on it, Julian. Thank you.
All right, McGregor. Well, I will keep you posted as I find things, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. So we've heard from the owner. We've seen the painting. And now let's get to the work. And the first thing that needs to happen is I need to remove this painting from its frame and then get the painting off of the stretcher. It's always surprising to me that a painting can be held in a frame with the whopping sum of 3 rusty nails. I suppose they did their job, but we'll do better later on. Pulling the frame and the painting apart in this case was pretty easy. Sometimes it is not. I've found paintings glued, stapled, nailed, screwed into their frames. Luckily, in this case, the 3 rusty nails gave way. Now, upon looking at this painting, I'm noticing that there is no tacking edge. That's right, the painting is simply glued to the stretcher, which is a first for me. I have seen paintings nailed and screwed to the stretchers, but I have never seen one without a tacking edge, just glued down. So I need to remove this painting from the stretcher. And luckily, the adhesive that was used has deteriorated and, well, failed, so it's fairly brittle. And using a small, thin palette knife, I can work my way around the edges and lift up the canvas from the support. I'll break the glue joint with the palette knife or a scalpel, and then as I lift the painting off, it will separate from that stretcher. In this case, we're really lucky that this old glue has deteriorated. Imagine if this were epoxy. Well, then I'd probably need power tools. And while I love using power tools, using a palette knife and a scalpel is much easier and much safer, both for me and the painting. And so, with the last flick of the palette knife, the painting is separated. Now, if it wasn't patently obvious, this canvas is very old and very brittle, so I have to take a little bit of extra care moving it. Notwithstanding this massive tear right along the sitter's face, the other areas of the canvas are just as fragile, and so I need to make sure that when I'm sliding it off of the support, none of the canvas catches and creates an additional tear. Because not only would that be more work for me, but I really, really don't want to damage a painting. It kind of goes against everything that conservators stand for. Now, because it is so fragile and brittle, I am not simply going to grab this painting and move it around. I'm going to slide a piece of acid-free foam core underneath it to provide a little bit of temporary support and stability when I do transport the painting to the back half of the studio. Generally, I can pick up a canvas and move around with it relatively freely, but you can see even as I try to lift it up onto this foam core, it's just kind of crumbling under its own weight, and that's just because the canvas is so torn. So this foam core is going to provide a little bit of support as I move it to the back of the studio where I'm going to face the painting in preparation for removing the lining. Now I'm going to head over to my expandable spray booth room area, and I've heated up the adhesive, and I'm going to start applying it to the face of the painting. I could use a roller, and I will later on, but in order to make sure that the canvas doesn't tear and that the roller doesn't grab any of the loose areas, I'm just going to use a brush to apply the first layer of adhesive. And then I'll take a large sheet of washi kozo, that beautiful Japanese mulberry paper that's incredibly strong, incredibly thin, and very flexible, and lay it down into that adhesive and just kind of press it so that there's a good bond. Now this is a temporary solution. This adhesive that I'm using is specifically for conservators, and it is heat and solvent activated, so I can use heat or solvent to soften it up and remove this adhesive later on. And this is also a flexible adhesive. I don't want something that's terribly brittle because the painting is going to flex as I handle it, and if the adhesive were really brittle, then the bond would break and the facing would become moot. Now I'm using this adhesive as opposed to a fish gelatin because the adhesive used to line the painting was rabbit skin glue, and I'll need to expose that to moisture to remove it. And if I used a fish gelatin adhesive, when I expose the painting to moisture, it would run the risk of lifting up that facing, again rendering it moot. So once the adhesive has had a day or two to dry, I can begin removing the old lining. And sleeves up, of course, because inevitably if I don't roll them up, they get very dirty. Now it appears that this canvas is fairly brittle, and it's just going to peel right off. I always hope that I can take the canvas off in one fell swoop, kind of grab it by the corner and just peel it back, as in some of the other videos I have. Sometimes, however, that's not the case, and for this painting, the canvas is just so deteriorated and so old that trying to slide the palette knife underneath it, well, it just tears. And this is not a big problem. I don't need to save this old lining canvas, but it just means that I can't peel it back in one fell swoop. Even using the palette knife to try to slide under and lift up large sections is proving to not be an adequate solution. In fact, sometimes I can't even get the palette knife underneath the lining canvas. So that means it's scalpel time. And scraping. Lots and lots of scraping. I am working now in small little 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter bits and slicing off the old lining canvas. This is what I was hoping I wouldn't have to do, because as you can see, there is a lot of real estate for me to work with, and it's going to take some time. In fact, this is going to take the better part of 2 days, working all day to remove this canvas in small bits. And I'll take breaks, of course, but there's no other way to do this. So, scrape away. Now, after quite a bit of scraping, I am on to, well, more scraping. But this time I have to remove the rabbit skin glue from the back of the original canvas. Now, I am using a gelled water solution here because rabbit skin glue is hygroscopic, meaning that it absorbs ambient moisture or water when it comes in contact. And so this gelled water will sit on the rabbit skin glue and allow that glue to swell, become soft, and then using a dull scalpel, because in this case I don't want to cut any of the canvas, the original canvas that is, I will begin the process of removing this rabbit skin glue. This is a little bit more rewarding than removing the canvas because this is the last bit of scraping I will need to do. Unfortunately, there is a lot of rabbit skin glue on this painting, and as you can see, it is piling up pretty quickly. Now, I can only go section by section, and I'm working in about a 6-inch, 7-inch square section, which is about the limits of the size that I can employ at one time. And that's because I don't want the canvas to distort, I don't want the gelled water solution to start to dry out, and if I try to do too much at once, I always feel like I'm rushing. So working in small sections allows me to have control and allows me to affect the change that I want in a deliberate manner without running the risk of any nasty side effects, which don't sound all that bad. But if I can control the movement of this canvas, if I can make everything predictable, if I can eliminate unforeseens, well, that means that there is less for me to have to fix or clean up, and I'll get a better understanding of precisely the limits of this painting and its materials. So you can see that the rabbit skin glue is piling up, and it is kind of gross. This is not a lovely material to work with. It sticks to everything. It sticks to the gloves, my arms, my apron. It's on the floor. It's on my shoes. And it's just kind of gross. So be gone, rabbit skin glue. Once the meditative or soul-crushing task of scraping is complete, the painting can be transferred over to the hot table to receive a treatment to remove any waves, ripples, dents, or other planar distortions. The painting is exposed to a damp blotter paper. It's enveloped with some PET film. The table is heated up, the air is sucked out, and the combination of heat, moisture, and pressure relaxes the canvas and flattens it. And once the table has reached the appropriate temperature, it will be allowed to cool, and then the painting will rest under new blotter papers until it is dry and acclimated. After speaking with McGregor and the art historian with whom we are working to research this painting, we decided to take some samples and have them analyzed by a lab. Now, the first sample I'm going to take is of the canvas. I would normally use the tacking edge or some selvage, but in this case we just don't have any extra canvas. So I have to take a piece of the actual painting. Now, this is an incredibly delicate process, but by moistening the canvas, I can soften the size, which bonds the ground layer to the canvas. Once it's adequately soft, I can start to peel back this canvas layer from the paint. Now, the only thing that is holding this paint together is the washi kozo facing. I have to be extremely careful here, because if the paint crumbles, well, it's lost. And while this corner of the painting already has significant paint loss, that's why I chose this area, I don't want to add to any of that. But by working very slowly and peeling back and slicing back the canvas, I can release it from the paint layer, and then I will have my sample. Now, ultimately, the lab is going to have to process this sample to remove organic contaminants, and the radiocarbon dating that we're going to do will tell us when this canvas was produced. Well, actually, what it will do is tell us when the cotton last exchanged carbon with the atmosphere. But in order to send it to the lab, I have to maintain a chain of custody, so I'll photograph the sample with a color and ruler card. I will label it, and then it is sealed and off to the laboratory. Anything but this, and they won't accept this sample. So it's absolutely critical to maintain this chain of custody. Now, of course, I have removed a piece of canvas from the painting, and if I don't replace it, when I take the facing off, the paint in that area will just crumble. So I've gone to my stock of old canvases. I have found one that is of the same or similar enough weave and weight. The warp and the weft match. And I'm going to cut it and create an inlay. But before I do, I need to make sure it fits. And once I'm happy with the size, trimming off a little bit here and there, I also need to fray the edges, because this freshly cut canvas is too crisp. I need a softer edge. Once I've done that, I can apply some adhesive to the actual paint layer, and then I'll apply a little bit to the canvas patch, and I will inlay it in to the recess. Once it's fitted, I'll cover it with some blotter paper, some release film, and some weights to let it dry. And this will take about a day. Now, in addition to the canvas, we're also taking a sample of this wooden stretcher. Now, we have every reason to believe that this is not the original stretcher. We know that this painting has been worked on at least 2 times before, and if it is 471 years old, probably more than 2 times. But we still want to take advantage of this opportunity to get some information about this wood. It will help us place more information into the history of this painting. Even if this stretcher isn't as old as the canvas, it will give us a data point about when this conservation took place. And so again, I've documented the process of removing the samples, ironically both with still photography and video, here. And I'm just taking a little piece of the wood. Well, I'm actually taking a fairly large piece of the wood. The lab requested a little bit more of the wood than of the canvas, because apparently processing the wood requires more material. The good news is that there is ample wood, and once I have removed this piece, I can create a little Dutchman to fill it. And just like with the canvas sample, I'm going to bag these little chips of wood. I'm going to then label the bag, and then I'm going to place it right next to the sample location with my color card, which also has a little ruler on it, and I'm going to photograph it. And it may seem excessive or redundant to do all of these steps. I mean, we're just sampling and testing some wood here, but the lab requires this because they need to make sure that what I'm sending them is what I gathered and that there has been no bait and switch. Of course, now we have a sample, but we also have a gap and a structural compromise on the original support. And into that gap, a Dutchman needs to be fit. So because the original support is oak, I'm going to use oak as well. And after spreading a little bit of wood glue into the gap with a very scientific and space-age advanced approach, I am ready to place the Dutchman in and clamp it into place. And this is going to take a day or so to dry, and once it's dry, I will come back with chisels and a plane and begin to shape it to the profile of the original support. And then this stretcher will be as good as new. Nobody will ever see this Dutchman, and it will provide adequate structural support. And now I can check on the repair of the canvas where I took the little sample, and we can see that it fits, it's smooth and flush. And now I am ready to take the painting over to the back half of the studio and start preparing it for its interleafed lining. I'm going to lay down a flat spun nylon gossamer onto the canvas. I'm going to trim it so that it fits. I'll trim it again later. And then I'm going to apply the conservation adhesive to the back of the canvas. Now, observant viewers will notice that this is the same adhesive that I used to face the painting, which presents a unique question. When I remove the facing, will it compromise the adhesive bond on the back? Well, the answer is kind of, maybe, but not really, and it's not that big of a deal. I know, big dodge, right, Julian? But here's the thing. When I remove the facing from the front, only the areas where there are holes and tears will the solvent penetrate through and go to the back of the painting, where there is also adhesive. Yes, this will soften up that adhesive, but I'm not going to actively remove it, so it won't be disturbed that much. In addition, when I go to line this painting, there's going to be adhesive on the PET film, so double the adhesive. So any that is lost or thinned out by the removal process of the facing that's happening here, there will be plenty of adhesive. So yes, the adhesive on the back of the canvas may be thinned out during this removal process, but it's not going to have any adverse effects on the lining process. And because the adhesive is solvent-based, I can merely apply the solvent to the facing and let it sit, and the adhesive releases from the face of the painting. Yes, there is some residue, and I will clean that off, but again, the painting needs to be cleaned anyways and the old varnish removed, so anything that's on the surface is going to come off one way or the other. With the facing removed, I have assembled the lining sandwich, transferred the painting to the hot table, and now I'll simply line the painting. Once the canvas is brought up to temperature, about 150 degrees Fahrenheit, I can turn the heat off, let it cool, take it out of the Mylar envelope, and then put it back together. So join me for the next episode where I wrap up the work and put the painting, well, back together. And maybe we'll hear from McGregor just one more time.